So I'm going to go ahead and start because we typically just start right on time. I know we have a big and anyway, we'll go ahead and start. And so tonight, what we're going to do is I'm going to talk about 5 different key factors in working with kids with challenging behavior this year. As I was sitting here at the house and in our office here and just thinking about what teachers need the most right now, what would be most helpful for teachers as they enter the school year. And some of you may have already entered, and some of you may be administrators or other positions as well. But I thought, if I were going to tell people 5 things that would help them with challenging kids to start off the school year, what would they be? And so I started thinking about it, and I came up with a list of 5 things. And I don't know if they're the best or not. There's other things that I could talk about for a little bit, but I think these 5 things are crucial, and they're key. And if you can implement just 1 or 2 of them, you're going to see a change you're going to have a better school year, because you're going to get off to a better start if we just start doing this. So I don't know how many of you have already started school. Some of you probably have already started, others, depending on where you're from, but others are getting ready to start school, I know. So let's talk about those things. What we're going to do is I'm going to talk about those 5 factors for a while, and then I'm going to put you guys in breakout rooms. And our wonderful administrative assistant, Charlotte, is with us tonight. And she is going to put it in breakout rooms of 5. And then we'll give you about 15 minutes to talk about those 5 factors. And we've got a question that you guys can use to discuss. And then we'll bring you back, and we'll have about 10 or 15 minutes where we can discuss it as a group. We can ask questions. You guys can ask questions, or discuss what you felt was most important. And then finally, what we will do is at 6 o'clock, we'll end the meeting. But if you want to stay on for questions or just to discuss any topic, I will stay on for as long as you want to talk about anything that you feel you would like to discuss or ask questions about. So I'm going to go ahead and get started and just go through these 5 things that I thought might be important for you guys. If you see me looking up again, that's because you guys are up here. It's not, you probably see my chin, but anyway, that I'm looking up at you guys up here. Okay, so let's talk about the first thing that I decided to talk about was this thing called safety and connection. So safety and connection versus isolation and protection. And then I want to talk for a couple of minutes about working on your emotional state. And then I want to talk about proactively addressing challenging behavior before it occurs. And then I want to discuss providing the right kind of stress. And then I want to briefly talk about Dr. Bruce Perry's 6 R's for your classroom or school. So some of you may be familiar with some of the things that I talk about tonight. I'm going to be talking about things from Dr. Perry, from Stephen Porges of the polyvagal theory. I'll be talking about research from the HeartMath Institute, and others, probably other people as well. You're getting a whole bunch of different. You're getting I was going to say, well, stroganoff. You're getting goulash is what I was going to say. I don't know if anybody knows what goulash means, but anyway, it's where you throw everything together, and that's what you're getting tonight. All right, I haven't used that word in a long time. Don't know where that came from, but anyway, let's start with first of all, safety and connection. Okay, so I want to read the slide first. You guys can read it here, but take a look at this slide. And kids that with challenging behavior, as we know, are often been through trauma and toxic stress. And so they need to re-experience physical and sensory safety to decrease the arousal response. And they need feelings of a safe environment and safe caregivers and staff. So they need to be able to rely on us for structure, care, and comfort. And telling a child that they're safe is not enough. So there has to be a felt sense of safety. So you as the adult must help them experience safety so that they will believe and feel that they're safe. So let me talk about safety and connection for just a minute. And your students that have experienced trauma and or toxic stress, too much stress that has created vulnerability instead of resilience, are oftentimes, they feel a sense of isolation and protection. They're living out of that state. They feel it in their bodies. They experience it. And they have corresponding thoughts that go along with those feelings of isolation and protection. Now, this trauma, this experience of trauma then shifts them away from connection to protection. But what they want is they do want connection with you. That's what the research says, that connection is a biological imperative for all of us. We need connection as much as we need air. Our survival response, which we're always talking about, our survival response is important to our absolute health, right? But our ability to connect to others is equally as important. We have no idea. We have really no realization of how important connection is to us. So these kids want to connect with you, but here's the thing. They have what I call a private logic. A private logic, and this came from Alfred Adler, a famous psychologist many years ago, and is used by also you could find it in the Institute of Trauma and Loss, the National Institute for Trauma and Loss. It's in their work as well, where they talk about this thing called private logic. And private logic is how an individual sees themselves, how they view the world, and how they view others. Well, kids with challenging behavior, who typically have toxic stress and an oversensitized stress response system, typically then have a private logic that if I get too close to you, then you will reject me. And so they have this draw to connect with you, but then when you try to move in and get close to them, they move away from you. They move back, and they have behaviors that they use to push you back away. So the thing that I want you to see here is that this private logic then is based on this idea that if I get too close to you, you're going to either reject me or you're going to abandon me. And so what Stephen Porges says, the gentleman that developed the polyvagal theory, says is that trauma might be described as a chronic disruption of connectedness. And I love that. A trauma is a chronic disruption of connectedness. In other words, we lose our connection from others and basically from our world, and we become isolated. So we have this sense of isolation when we're in a state of trauma. Now, some of you here tonight may have experienced what I'm talking about. I've actually experienced it as a trauma survivor. And so the thing about it is that your student survival responses can prevent them from finding safety and connection. And these students need a regulated teacher to provide them with a sense of felt safety, to move them out of protection to connection. So co-regulation is the key component for moving them to this sense of safety. Why? One of the reasons you just got to know this is they can feel your connection with them. Either they can feel your emotional state. And the HeartMath Institute is an organization that has proven that we can feel and sense other people's emotional state. But there are other neuropsychologists and neurobiologists out there that are saying the same thing. Okay, so this is we know this. Even if they couldn't feel it, they can sense it. And you can probably sense it in others as well at times, right? Where you can feel like, as a matter of fact, other neurobiologists like Dr. Bruce Perry, which we use a lot of his work when we do trainings, Dr. Perry talks about this issue of like these kids, like they know whether you are safe or not. Why? Because they're in a constant state of hypervigilance. And because of their developmental stress that they've experienced developmental stress that is so unpredictable and too large of doses of stress, so that they're very vulnerable. And kids and adults that are living out of a state of hypervigilance, then they're always scanning for unsafe situations and unsafe people. And so they know when you're regulated or not. So here's the important thing then, is that how do you restore a sense of safety? So you have got to be this safe person and create a safe environment, a felt safe environment. Well, one of the ways that you do that is not, I don't want to go there yet. Yeah, I do, Tim. Is you have to work on your emotional state. And how do you do that? Well, what I'm talking about here is that most of the time, think about this, most of the time we have stories about these kids with challenging behavior, and that story creates an emotional state, and that emotional state creates our strategy. We use that emotional state to create our strategy, don't we? Think about it. We know that child or those children that we're going to work with this year, that we're going to start with, and we pretty much know who they are. And as soon as we get them, we see that challenging behavior, and then we create a story that, wow, this kid is really hard. This kid is really difficult. This kid is whatever the story is. And when we do that, that really creates our reality about them. And what's creating the reality? Our emotional state. The story is creating our emotional state, the story we tell ourselves, which is creating our reality, basically, how we feel. And how we feel then is going to create how we act, is going to influence that. And so then we tend to, when we have those kids with challenging behaviors, we feel that story about them ends up creating what I'm going to call an incoherent or a dysregulated emotional state in us. And how can we co-regulate them and make them feel safe when we're in that state? So what I'm telling you tonight is that you've got to change your physiological state. And then when you change your physiological state, then you change your story. And that changes your strategy. So if I can put myself in a physiological state of renewing emotions, then I can change my strategy of working with kids. I'm going to enjoy my work more. I'm going to be more regulated around that child. And that regulation and that coherence is going to rub off on that child. They're going to feel that. What you're looking at here from the HeartMath Institute, if you haven't ever seen any of this or talked about or heard me talk about the HeartMath Institute or anybody else, is that what we're looking at is when when our autonomic nervous system is out of sync, it's not performing in an optimal way, the two branches of our autonomic nervous system are sympathetic branch, which speeds everything up, and our parasympathetic branch, which slows everything down in our body, is out of sync. And the thing about it is that what we need to do is we need to create what we call coherence. And coherence is when our heart, mind, and emotions are working in sync with each other. And when our other physiological systems, our nervous system, our immune system, and our hormonal system are working in an optimal way. In other words, our body and our mind are working at peak performance. Now, what you're looking at here is this incoherence says incoherence inhibits brain function. What you're looking at are heart rhythm patterns, and we can hook a heart rhythm monitor to our earlobe, and it will show us what our heart rhythm patterns are. It will actually show us the variability between our heart rate, our heartbeats, and it will create, and it will also show us how our sympathetic and parasympathetic branches are actually working as well. But here's the thing I want you to know, is that when we are experiencing depleting emotions, such as frustration, anger, fear, worry, anxiety, all of those things create these very chaotic looking heart rhythm patterns and inhibit our brain function and also inhibit our physiology as well. But what if we're in a state of coherence? When you decide that you're going to change your emotional state, you're going to feel more care, you're going to feel more compassion, you're going to feel more love, you're going to feel more happiness, joy, you're going to feel more appreciation, more gratitude for these children, for your life, for everything. When you change, you can do this through simple strategies. You can change your emotional state. And when you do that, then you synchronize the heart. All of this information is sent to the heart, which is now considered a heart brain, an actual brain. The heart sends information to the brain, to the thalamus, which synchronizes the whole brain and puts everything, both brain and body, into synchronization. So you're not only affecting your psychology, you're affecting all of your physiology as well, your autonomic nervous system, and therefore you're affecting your health as well. Now, what are you going to do here? How does this help you? Well, it helps you change your story. And it also is going to help those kids that you're working with to be in a more regulated, coherent state as well. So let's talk about number 3 here, because I have to move forward here, and like I said, I'm willing to stay later if you want to ask questions about anything that I've talked about tonight. But you can, look, here's one thing you can do. You can do very simply, you can put yourself in a state of coherence. And if I'll just take like 2 minutes to talk about that at the end. So here's what we've got. What we're looking at now is a proactive regulation plan. Okay, so what do you need to do? You can proactively address challenging behavior before it ever occurs. What are we talking about here? Regulation, a state of regulation is when you are in your cortex and the child is in their cortex. That's regulation. We haven't really thought of it this way as educators probably, but your job is to be able to access the cortex of your children's brain. Think about that. Because no learning occurs without accessing the cortex. The lower parts of the brain are involved in regulating bodily functions and the stress response system, right? So when you're not in your cortex, you can't think clearly. You're not in coherent state. You're liable to say anything or do anything. So our job to get kids to learn then is to get them in a regulated state. So take a look at this particular slide. As you can see on this slide, what we're showing here at you is part of a functional behavior assessment and behavior plan that Doris and I do. And I want you to just look at some of the things that we do. So here's what I'm suggesting. For those kids that have challenging behavior and are going to walk into the school and they're going to immediately not be able to meet your expectations, the demands of the environment. By the way, here's the definition of stress: the demands of the environment. Think about it. Stress is simply the demands that are placed on you during the day. So these kids are going to walk into our school on the first day of school, and they're going to walk into your classroom, and they are not going to be able to handle the demands of the school, what you're going to be asking them to do. So these kids right away need a plan that as soon as they walk into the door, we have a plan to get them regulated as soon as they do. And this could start with a movement group. This could start with a HeartMath strategy group. This could be something like working on, we have simple strategies of how they can work on their brain functioning, where they can work on their trauma basically by accessing the right hemisphere of the brain, and by doing something sensory like drawing, and then talking about that drawing, which accesses the left hemisphere of the brain. So it puts the brain into more coordination or cooperation. During a trauma response, the brain loses this coordination and cooperation between the two hemispheres. So when you're doing sensory activities with kids, you're helping them heal their trauma. So you could use something like that as something to help the kids get it regulated as soon as they come to school. Here's some other things you do. Some of you may have had collaborative problem solving. You could also do what we call a Plan B conversation with them, a Plan B intervention. This is a great time. Here's another thing you could do, whether you've had collaborative problem solving or not. You could talk to them about, where is your emotional state? What are the expectations today that you are going to have to meet? If you can't meet them, what are you going to do? How are we going, right? You're preparing them, and what you're doing is that whoever's working with them on this is creating regulation. So what you're doing is, and there's a whole lot of other things that I could talk about, but you can do anything that's movement, anything that's rhythmic is regulating. So there's a whole lot of different things you could do here. Even walking and talking would be something that you could do with those kids for, let's say, 10 minutes. Somebody could do that before they ever came to your classroom. Then you also need to have a plan to help them stay regulated, right? So you can see some of the things that we suggested in this plan. Taking a walk, use of instrumental music during work times, to help them not only block out other noises, but music that's at about 60 to 80 beats per minute, which is right where the heartbeat is, right? Where a regulated heart rate is, okay? I've got a ton of different strategies that you can use that are simple strategies that are so easy to use that would help your child stay regulated during the day. Then what if they get dysregulated? Well, then we have something to re-regulate them. You can see here that we suggested maybe an opportunity to bounce on a mini trampoline, maybe the opportunity to use a pull-up bar, maybe the opportunity to use another HeartMath strategy, or to do something that they know is going to regulate them. Maybe it's tossing a ball back and forth with them while you're talking to them. The point I want to make here is that this is huge. This proactive regulation plan is something that I believe every child should have that has been through trauma and toxic stress, and are going to come to your classroom. I'm suggesting talk to your administrators. If you're an administrator here today on this call, think about this. You could have this for the children that are going to walk into the classroom and they're immediately going to be dysregulated because the classroom is too stressful for them. This is foundational for everything that we do, is that they get regulated, that they have a regulated brain, because again, without it, you're not going to get any learning. We're just fooling ourselves. Now, here's the fourth thing that you can do. Provide the right kind of stress. So kids with trauma impacts and toxic stress have been exposed to large doses of stress, unpredictable caregivers, so unpredictable stress in their life. In other words, when they had a need, that need wasn't always met, or maybe it was not met at all. And these large doses of stress had put them in a sense of where they didn't have any control over their stress response. And so what these large doses of stress do are they create a stress response system that is sensitized to stress. And so that, and I want you to really hear this, so that any little bit of stress can cause a large stress response. Their stress response system has been patterned so that it does not return to baseline. Any child that's been through neglect, any complex developmental trauma, or even any situation where they didn't have a caregiver that was predictable and that was relational and that met their needs when they needed those needs met, their basic needs. So they then have this stress response system that is patterned to be very vulnerable to stress, and now so that these little stressors can create large stress responses. In other words, large amounts of challenging behavior. So what do they need? They need these small doses of positive stress from you. Doses of stress that are moderate, predictable, and controlled and relational. What am I talking about? I'm talking about like this. Things where you just say hello to the child. You say, I'm glad you're here. That's a dose of stress. So happy that you're here today. But here are the dose of stress that I like to talk about. You're walking up to the child and saying things like this. It seems like that you're having a hard time right now getting started on your math, for example. Is there something that I can do to help you? It seems like, hey, it looks like you got started on your math problems. How did you do that? In other words, and then you're out, these are those doses of relational stress where you're going to them and just your presence alone. How are you doing? Are you okay? Do you need anything? Can I help you? Notice these are all questions. You're asking questions which are very regulating to the nervous system. And you're coming and you're basically saying, how can I support you? How can I meet your needs? These doses of stress have shown, and I know it seems magical, these doses of stress that I'm talking about have shown to help kids return the stress response back to the original baseline. This is one of the most powerful things you can do. Dr. Bruce Perry talks about this, the dosing and spacing of the stress response system. And research clearly shows that you can make a huge difference in not only their challenging behavior, but their ability to regulate and deal with the demands that school puts on them. And then finally, speaking of Perry, what I thought about right away was, if you haven't seen Dr. Perry's 6 R's, these are wonderful. And I've already talked a little bit about some of these, but if you were to incorporate all of these into your classroom, and they're simple things, I guarantee you it would make a difference. So Perry talks about being relational, right? And he talks about, one of the things that Dr. Perry talks about that I really love too, is he talks about relational, not only your relationship with a child, but creating more relationships, the quality of the relationships and the quantity of the relationships for that child. In other words, more teachers. that are relational with the child, meaning really more doses of positive stress. Creating a classroom where kids are willing to help other kids, to help these kids, to befriend them, to help them when they're having a hard time. We've seen this work where you're asking peers, even first, second, third graders, they're willing to help their peers who are struggling. So anything that you can do that's relational is provide safety. And then relevant. Relevant is developmentally appropriate, right? Are we providing material, instructional content to a child that's matched to their developmental age? And this is where we can mess up sometimes inadvertently, because we're thinking this is a 12-year-old. He or she should be able to do this work. When in fact, if they've been through toxic stress or trauma, they are likely at a lower developmental age. So we have to take that into consideration. Where are they at developmentally, and match the work to them. And then repetitive and patterned. Repetitive and patterned, when we talk about that, we are talking about the idea that the more that you can give them sort of smaller chunks, so to speak, of work, the more repetitive and patterned that is. I can put it this way, the smaller the doses, they need smaller doses of content to be able to learn. And the more that you can repeat that content for these kids, the better. So large amounts of content at a time are not as effective as giving these kids smaller doses of content and then repeating it several times. And this is the way that their brains are going to learn a lot better. And then rewarding and pleasurable. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about, because we have reward centers in the brain. And reward is typically in normal development, reward is connected with pleasure, isn't it? Reward is relationships are rewarding. So again, what we're talking about here is that what can we do to create fun? What can we do to create reward in the classroom? And so how can we make our learning pleasurable and rewarding in an environment that's safe and regulated? So Perry then talks about the idea that can we do things in our environment? Can we create instruction? Can we create the way that we work with our kids in a way that is rewarding and pleasurable for them and for you as well as a teacher? And then rhythmic. Rhythmic is anything that's rhythmic is rewarding and regulating. So there's a lot of things I can talk about here, but basically anything that you do that is rhythmic, from movement to music to things like drumming, to walking, to singing, to any of these things that you can incorporate into the learning environment are regulating for the child. I have a story of a little boy who was so traumatized, probably a first or second grader, and he would sit in the back of a classroom, and one day the teacher, and he wouldn't do any work, he hadn't done any work all year, and the teacher one day starts singing with the kids. They start singing the alphabet. All of a sudden, it's like his brain came alive. He went up to the front of the room and got in front with the teacher and asked the teacher if he could help her. And they held hands as they sung the alphabet together with the kids. And I'll never forget it. He was moving, he was swaying back and forth. It was the first time I had seen his cortex online. So we know that anything that you can do is rhythmic. That is rhythmic is going to regulate the brain and help all of your kids, but especially your kids with challenging behavior, to access their cortex. And then finally, respectful of the child, respectful of their family, their culture, their race. And any way that you can integrate that into your, and I know you guys know this, but any way that we can integrate that into our content and use their backgrounds to as springboards for learning, then that is going to help them become more engaged. So if I am an African American male, and now we're talking about, and I'm writing a story about African American males and heroes of mine, now I'm adding this piece in there. I am showing this respectfulness for that child's culture, and they're going to be more likely to want to access that learning and become more involved, and the learning becomes more pleasurable for them, and they're going to be able to access the learning or the content more. I know you guys all know that, but I wanted to just show you all of Perry's 6 R's. And if you haven't seen them, we can get you a copy of them. And he goes into a lot more depth than I did tonight, of course, but this is something that even if you were only able to add on several of these, that would be fantastic as well. Okay. All right. So I'll tell you what, let's put you in breakout groups, and we can put you in breakout groups we were going to do it for 15 minutes. So let's put them in breakout groups for, let's put them in breakout groups for 15 minutes, like we said we were going to do. And so Charlotte's going to do that, and we're going to put you in groups of 5. And here's where we're going to ask you to do. Identify and share one of these areas in which you can imagine yourself applying these practices and what that might look like in the day-to-day in your role and setting. So just talk about with your group, what do you think are areas or an area that you might be able to use this year at the beginning of the year, and what might that look like in your setting? So go ahead and put them in the breakout groups, Charlotte, and then we'll come back and we'll debrief. Okay, guys, welcome back. So how did it go in the breakout rooms? So what are some of the areas that you guys decided on that you might try to apply?
I talked about using the more around the rhythmic and trying to get staff to understand about the connection with the brain and how important that is, and that plan before the students come in, and having them settled so they can learn.
That's great. That's great. And the thing Perry talks about is having that rhythmic music sometimes in the background, but for a very regulating type of music. Then he also talks about having some more energetic music for times when you want to get the kids more energized and they're going to be more active. So, yeah, I mean, he talks about things like activities such as walking, swaying, drumming, singing, any sort of movement, deep breathing, those sort of things. Some of the heart math techniques that you probably heard us talk about, where you're breathing in and out at about 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out, and then you're just imagining that something that creates maybe something you're grateful for, or that you appreciate, or you're just feeling care for someone, and then you just allow yourself to feel that care as you breathe in and out, and you're focusing on the area of your heart while you're doing that, and doing that for just short periods of time, just, up to, 1 to 3 to 5 minutes can put you in a more coherent, regulated state. And those are things that you can do with your eyes closed, that kids could do in the classroom together. And you may have already seen all the research that there is that shows how this can really affect the mental health and academic performance of kids with challenging behavior, with mental health diagnoses. And I don't know if Diane's still here, but she can, Diane, you can attest to that, correct?
Oh yeah, absolutely, Rick. Last quarter, my college students, half the class had diagnosed depression and anxiety disorders. One young woman student had been institutionalized and locked up in a mental institution for her whole senior year of high school. And then they came to my class and we began each class session with a heart math meditation. And they learned how to do that. And they said that was the most valuable thing they've learned in college.
That is awesome.
Right.
That is awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And we have all this research that shows that it helps. We have research on elementary school kids to high school kids, how it helps academic performance and mental health disorders. Fascinating. So,
quick factoid, I can interject real quick.
yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Mark.
Back to the brain and music. Back in the 60s at UCLA, when they were mapping the brain and they figured out where spatial and math, language and sight were all in these quadrants, and they found that the brain really had a quadrant kind of design to it. And they were like, well, what they discovered is that music didn't have a location. Music was in all 4 quadrants. And so if you make the phrase, our brains are wired for sound, you're literally saying something that the brain people who wanted to Magellan map the brain like the Earth discovered. And so the power and the whole field of music therapy has exploded in the last 30 years. And so it's not surprising that all of this information is being more and more brought relevant, that and so, like, for me, my go-to is disco when I want to do housework, you know what I mean? So it's like,
Awesome.
right, so we all kind of have that playlist to help us get through the mundane and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so those mood changers. So I'm not saying I'm not surprised. It's just so exciting, the possibilities, and just playing some simple music to help regulate children. It's really exciting.
Yeah, thank you for that, for sharing that. This is a direct quote from Dr. Bruce Perry. The brain is a musical, rhythmic organ that responds to the creative use of both sound and beat. So just to support what you said, that's a quote from Bruce Perry and his work.
Tracy made the point in our group, about the fact that we use that to self-regulate all the time. When you're anxious or something, you turn on the music that calms you down, and maybe take a walk, and so we use it all the time, as well as seeing that potential for using it with kids.
Yeah, absolutely, Paul. And you think about it too, is that you can listen to a song and it will activate memories, won't it? Places that you've been, and different songs will activate different memories as well. And so yeah, very
There's
powerful.
a lot of great research also on just doing any kind of rhythmic activity with a group of people, and they feel more bonded at the end of that activity. So it's a great way to start off a class, or it's a great way when you're working with a new group to kind of make connections, because they accomplish something together.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, Perry also talks about just having these somatosensory activities in the classroom, taking breaks and maybe listening to music, or just taking breaks and having some sort of activity. And I know that, in the past, when I went to school and when I was in grade school and elementary and high school, that would have been like, well, that's a waste of time. I mean, we're here to do the academics. And, Perry and others are saying, I mean, that's how you get to do the academics. Yeah, go ahead, Tracy. Did you want to say something? Oh. Anybody else want to share? Either share an area that you might try to apply, or just anything at all related to what we're saying.
If I may, I think in our group, in my role, the thing that I saw as applicable to just what we're going to be working on this next year is working on your emotional state, because we work with coaching the teachers and the counselors and the administrative staff. And the biggest thing that we keep on seeing that pops up as a need is staff wellness, and making sure that staff are able to stay regulated, so that it helps with that co-regulation with the student. And it's just kind of fun seeing some light bulbs go on with folks, or hearing stories come back from folks. So I think that's going to be our big thing this year, is just making sure everybody stays regulated.
And Sierra, the thing is that in our trainings, it's interesting. We see a lot of people that think, well, we talk about the fact that it takes a regulated adult to regulate a child. And we know that's true. They need your regulated state. But on the other hand, we can't just tell teachers, well, you need to get regulated. That's not going to help, right? The thing about it is that, and I've seen people try to do that, and not helpful. But the thing about it is, when we start talking about the idea of, look, you've got to change your physiological state. Well, you've got to change your emotional responses. And the way you do that is really working on your physiology. It's working on, because we know that our emotions, and jump in anytime, Diane, because Diane's a certified HeartMath trainer as well. But anytime we change our emotions, we change our physiological state. We affect the way the heart beats on a beat to beat basis. That's how powerful our emotions are. Go ahead.
Yes.
Go ahead, Diane.
That's how powerful our emotions are. When we are in a room, and HeartMath research has shown this, the other people in the room can feel whether we're coherent or not. And if you have, a number of coherent people who are doing the HeartMath meditation, quick coherence technique, or something like what Rick talked about, they can affect and raise the coherence of the other people that are sitting there without saying anything, without doing anything, because we send out, about, 3 feet around us, our energies, and I think it's even further than that, but
Yes.
So that if you're in the room with a group of people, and we've all felt this, sometimes we feel really energized and happy, and sometimes we can walk into a room and our energies just go way down because we're responding to the energies of the people around us. That's a fact. What is also a reality in a lot of my teaching circles is that teachers are so dedicated that they sometimes get told, you need to take care of the students. You need to care for your students. And so then they forget about self-care, and they burn themselves out working really hard, and it doesn't help the students because they're incoherent.
Absolutely.
Out. So, for all those altruistic people who really want to help others, we cannot help others unless we are coherent, unless we are regulated. So, self-care is step one in being there for other people.
Yeah, thank you so much for saying that. I was going to, for everything you said, I was going to mention tonight that I was going to ask people, so who do you hang out with? Who are you, right? Who are you spending time with? Are you spending time with people that are in depleted emotional states? Or are you spending time with people who are in regulated, coherent emotional states? Here's what Diane, I'm following up on what Diane said, is that if you're spending time with those people that bring you down, that you don't feel safe around, that you can feel their emotional state, and it's creating more depleting emotions for you, then I suggest you limit your time with those people. Because as Diane's talking about, I mean, you teachers that are on the call and administrators tonight, you guys have to take care, like Diane was saying, you know, you can't drop into this area of what we call overcare, where now you're just feeling depleted, you're feeling burnout, you're feeling all of those things, you know, and you don't have anything to give to the kids. And so it does start with you guys and taking care of yourself. And it's because you care so much, like Diane said, is why you fall into often states of where you kind of overcare. I had a therapist friend years ago that told me, he said, Rick, don't ever be over concerned about anything, right? It's okay to be concerned about a child, but don't get over concerned about a child, because when you get over concerned, your emotional state, you're now operating out of a depleted emotional state. And when you're operating out of a depleted emotional state, what's your reality going to be? You're going to see things as going wrong. Like you're going to see everything that in the environment that is either not going well, or could possibly not go well in the future. And so other neurobiologists are talking about the fact that we project the way we feel. These are not HeartMath people. We project the way we, I believe Bruce Perry talks about this as well, how we project, and he doesn't say it like HeartMath says it, but we project ourself into the environment, and people sense whether we're safe, people sense whether we're regulated, and so on and so forth. So this isn't just HeartMath that's talking about this. This is other neurobiologists that this is going to be talked about more and more and more. And the other thing I want to just add is that you have 5 minutes of feeling care about someone, and that can increase your immune system for 6 hours. For 6 hours. You start feeling angry for 5 minutes, it can deplete your immune system for 6 hours. That's how powerful these emotions are. And this is all I'm quoting from studies out of the HeartMath Institute. So I hope that, I think that's a big one. I think that taking care of your emotional state, being able to walk into your job, and when you're not, nobody walks in to their work every day and goes, wow, I feel wonderful. But you can create a sense of calm and a sense of care and a sense of ease in a very short period of time, just through simple practices. And your kids, as Diane said, they're all going to benefit from that. And so will your coworkers as well. Okay, I'll stop preaching now and let you guys respond. So it's past 6 o'clock, guys. And you are certainly free to sign off if you'd like, or stay on. I am very happy to stay on, and we can keep talking. So what we'd like for you to do is, this is our monthly challenge, and so what we're going to challenge you to do is identify and write down one daily habit that will ensure that you incorporate these practices in your work with kids on a daily basis. And I'll tell you, one of the things that I would just highly recommend is dosing them with this positive relational stress. even if it's a smile, even if it's a hello, I'm so glad you're here. Dr. Bruce Perry talks about the power of that on the nervous system. It's very powerful. And we think, oh yeah, that's just, being nice. No, it's very powerful. But dosing them with those kids with, hi, I'm glad you're here. How can I support you? How can I help you? What do you need right now? Oh, wow, I noticed you're doing really great at that. You do that over and over and over again. And here's what's going to happen. That you're providing a predictable stress, aren't you? Predictable, controlled, relational. You become predictable to their nervous system. This isn't something where they go, oh, my teacher's really predictable and I can really trust her and she feels safe. No, your autonomic nervous system, their autonomic nervous system starts seeing you automatically as predictable and safe. You start doing this with your staff, your kids that you work with, anybody that you're around, the more predictable you are, the more safe you are to them. So that's the one I would really emphasize is this dosing with this moderate, predictable, controlled relational stress. And then we're also saying here is post it somewhere, identify the habit that you want or the practice that you want to put into your work, and then post it somewhere so that you'll be reminded of it every day. And so, the brain, most of the things that we learn, most of the things we think about are through association. So when you see that, so now you have an intent that I'm going to put some of these, either at least one or more of these practices into my work. And so I now have an intent. As soon as I step into the school, I'm going to do that. And the more you practice that, the more you practice the emotions, those positive emotions, the more you practice these dosing and so on that we're talking about, then the more that you repattern the limbic system. You repattern your own stress response and build skills in your own cortex. So anyway, this is how you do it. It's simple. It seems too simple, but we can do it. Okay, so if you need to go, that's great. If not, if you got questions or other things, bye, Diane. Thank you so much.